There we go. Hello, my name is Theo Blackmore, and I would like to introduce my colleague and friend.
Hello, I am Stephen Lee Hodgkins.
And we're in very different places. As you can tell, I'm not particularly overly attired because I'm in the glorious south. I'm down near Penzance in Cornwall, whereas Stephen is in the grim north.
Well, it's not that grim. It's actually very beautiful. So I'm in York, and that is that is several hundred miles from you, Theo.
It is. But our paths have crossed several times in the past. And so I thought to kind of just set a bit of context, we'd talk a little bit about how I know you, Stephen. And so I think the first time that we met was in 2007 at a Lancaster Disability Studies conference, because I was...
Yes, I think it was, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I was studying for my PhD and you were studying for yours.
Yeah.
And part of doing a PhD, part of being in academia is going to conferences and presenting papers. And so I presented a paper there.
What was it? What was the title of yours?
No idea. The title of my paper?
Yeah.
Well, my PhD was all about a French sociologist called Pierre Bourdieu. So I was interested in studying his methods, and he was interested in different kinds of capital, so social capital and cultural capital and academic capital, and how that affected feelings of disability was what I was interested in. What were you interested in?
Well, I was I was interested in the way people talk about disability and the way they particularly disclose their identities around it, and then like how identity is managed by people, and also how that varies depending on context. So like how activists talk about disability and meanings that surround that sort of thing, and then also how policy deals with it as well. So that is that's where, and I was with my late colleague Barbara, who I'd worked with, and actually I'd recorded a conversation with her about disability that I used as a quote in my PhD and in my paper that I was presenting at that conference. And actually Barbara came with me, so it was a little bit confusing for some people because there was the person and rather than just presenting the quote, what I did is I played her recording of her voice. So she was in the room and I was presenting, and the thing she said was, she says that I try and use my disability if that makes much sense. And that was the kind of key point I was used to talk about it, which is kind of, you know, you can't talk about disability without it being assumed there's something negative about it. And that's the dominant view of disability being a very negative thing is very persuasive. And while that might be that might be a lot of people's experience, what's interesting is that you can't break free from that easily and talk about it in a different way.
Right. Yeah. That's all very interesting. I saw a podcast this morning actually, and it's all about how some people are trying to change the term disability, and some people are uncomfortable with the term disability and calling disabled people. And they were talking about, they were rejecting the idea that anybody would call them differently abled. And it was two disabled people, one of whom was saying, yeah, there's no way you can call me differently abled. And the reason why people use that is because they're uncomfortable around disability and uncomfortable around disabled people. And those are non-disabled people who feel that way and try to use labels like that, which is an interesting take on it, really.
Yeah, totally. I think that is it goes against sort of it goes against sort of common sense, or like the idea of common sense that is a possibility, and yet that is just the way we sort of kid ourselves, or as a cultural values related to disability being only a negative thing.
So anyway, this is a very light-hearted podcast, as you can tell, and we just started at the breezier end of the conversation. What happened for me was that I did my PhD and then finished, and then I left academia, and I found a job advertised in the newspaper, and the job was to work for an organisation called the United Kingdom Disabled People's Council, on a project called the Disability LIB project. And the LIB stood for Listen, Include and Build. And so I phoned the number up to find out a bit more about Disability LIB. And the phone was answered by somebody who I didn't know, and his name was Hayle. And I had a conversation with him saying it was the kind of stuff I've been doing for years. How come I didn't have this job? And I got into a big old sulk about it. And he said, okay, I'll get my boss to phone you. And I said, who's your boss? And he said, oh, his name's Stephen. And we then had a conversation, you and I started working with you on that project for a couple or 3 years.
Yes, that was quite interesting. That was looking at doing, it was kind of a training support program for organisations, for disabled people's organisations. And that Disability Cornwall is one, and there are lots all over the country. And who are kind of unique in that they're, you know, they hold values that are about disabled people being included and getting the right support and challenging the kind of negative views about disability and speaking up and a lot of advocacy stuff.
So that's kind of how I got to know you, I think, because we would travel around the country together and meet up in Milton Keynes and Birmingham and Manchester and do conferences and talk at conferences, but very practical conferences, which was different from the academic conferences I'd been to. So it wasn't people presenting papers, it was people talking about their lived experience. So people like your friend Barbara and lots of other disabled people around the country talking about how they were living their lives, what they were doing, how they got around these different systems that everyone has to deal with as disabled people. And we were kind of part of that, which I thought was very invigorating and really interesting at a time that there wasn't that kind of infrastructure support for these kind of organisations, I didn't feel. So that was very interesting. So that was kind of how I got to know you, and then time passed and here we are. Now we're old and I've got no hair anymore. But the reason that we're meeting up now is because it's the end of November in 2022, and the weekend ahead of us, there is going to be December, and part of December is December the 3rd. And December the 3rd is on Saturday, and that's the International Day of Disabled People. So I just thought I'd talk to you about that for a minute, or not talk to you about that, but hear from you about that, because I think you know a bit about it, do you?
Well, so I was thinking about this, and in York, they are here is York Disability Week, the brochure. So this has kind of been an initiative, and that is Pete, who is the York's first and finest learning disabled Elvis impersonator. That he performing at an event we did a few years ago called York Disability Pride, and so I think so. It goes back. It's got some history. So it's 1992 that the UN, I think, is that right? The United Nations General Assembly. Yeah. They say that 3rd of December is to be known as International Day of Disabled People or persons with disabilities, and it's about kind of trying to promote understanding about disability, and what's interesting with that is that it's about it's about respect and dignity and independence, I think, rather than just so it's more about, you know, understanding and equality and inclusion than it is about sort of understanding different types of disability type thing. It's about inclusion, and I think that comes on the back of there being prior to that lots of sort of activism and change for disabled people led by them themselves. So culturally, it was on the back of the different ideas about kind of where disabled people should be supported in the community or not, and in different parts of the world there are different people at different spaces. And I think in the UK, this is just prior to the Disability Discrimination Act and the Value in People white paper that kind of was pushing to close a lot of long stay hospitals and segregated living like homes type thing.
It's interesting because the United Nations as an overarching body does seem to be a kind of organization that you'd like that to happen in, because they would be able to spread the load and spread the power a bit, so that there are countries in the world which are better than other countries in the world. I saw a program on telly, and I think it was last year or the year before anyway. It was called The Worst Place in the World to Be a Disabled Person. And it was a presenter called Sophie Morgan, who's a wheelchair user, and she went all around the world and ended up in Ghana. She decided was the worst place. And in Ghana, ideas about disability are very linked in with religion. So disabled people are taken to churches and people pray about them to kind of get rid of the disability. And if a woman gives birth to a disabled baby, the baby's taken down to the stream and left by the river for the night. And if they wake up in the morning and the baby's still there, it means the water spirits have left the baby for the humans. And that kind of understanding of disability is very different to the understandings of disability that we have in general in this country, which, we say a lot of bad things about this country, and there are a lot of bad things, and things do need to get better, and things are not anywhere near equal between disabled and non-disabled people. But I think it probably is one of the better places in the world to live as a disabled person. Personally, I don't know how you feel.
Well, I mean, there's certainly a lot. If there's certainly lots of positive things if you kind of are comparing it globally, and that is a big challenge, isn't it? So it's right that the UN should be promoting it everywhere and pushing ideas forward about, like, how all people can be included in all aspects of sort of living and family life and work and learning and all those kind of things. I think as well that the even within, like, so you have different people have different views about disability even within the same community, and so even lots of disabled people are divided on many issues about kind of learning, like, so special education is a key thing that can kind of divide people. Some people believe that certain support is better in a sort of segregated setting, whereas others believe people might more generally, like, it's about inclusion, and you should just be able to go to your school that's closest to you and all that kind of stuff. And then also kind of around the issues relating to treatments and therapies and stuff like that. So there are, and then kind of support as well. And we've seen in the UK kind of some of the real the tragic consequences, where people taking their own lives on the basis of how they've been left to feel around sort of welfare benefit cuts and tough sanctioning
And getting much worse now with the cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
The numbers of people who use food banks are mostly disabled people. And the people with the lowest incomes are all disabled people, and the poorest section of the community is all disabled people. It's horrifying.
Yeah, and there's lots of but if you think about some of the gains that disabled people have made, one example of kind of how social care or independent living can be achieved and works really well is around the provision of sort of direct payments, and how with the right support people can kind of live and participate appropriately. And I think that level of that aspect of policy and support has been kind of quite important in the UK's sort of recent history of including disabled people better within the community and all the rest of it, and supporting people to go about their everyday lives.
It's an interesting idea, isn't it? The direct payments thing, I think, is brilliant, but it's not universal and it's not universally applied, and local authorities all have different criteria as to whether you can be eligible for it and whether they in fact use it at the local authority level. So some people, person A living down here in Cornwall, might well receive it, but person B living in, I don't know where, let's make somewhere up, up in the north east, might not be able to get it for some reason or other because of some kind of eligibility. But and tied into local authority finance as well.
Yeah, and the support that exists within the community that people have access to in order to support them, because using direct payments not an easy, managing a budget, it's not an easy thing. And so where there are supportive organisations that know how to help people do these things, it can work really well. But that provision is also not uniformed by any means, and there's a lot of variability, even within areas that are close across like London boroughs. Just the support for that kind of thing is really, really important. When I a long time ago, when I worked in like an advocacy service, and that kind of did some direct payment and support as well, and I remember my manager Marie, she was telling me about International Day, and this was about and I think this might have been like the first time I'd really come across it and sort of understood the importance of it. And she described it to me as being like it's a kind of a chance, it's an event that you can use within your local community to just profile and celebrate some of the kind of the great achievements that disabled people have done, and by doing that you show the world a bit about how inclusion works and the value of that sort of thing. So I've always been a kind of a fan of trying to market with something in various ways, even if it's just a small thing like showing a film with some friends to watch, or poetry is a great way to kind of get people to sort of share things about their experience. And one of the things that Marie said to me that sticks in my mind was about this kind of issue of the direct payments, and like how kind of some UK people had really pushed for that idea and had got a local authority to kind of do something different about the support. So that's a real achievement to be celebrated. And I firmly believe that kind of that, it's one of many examples of things that is good to kind of remember about, particularly around 3rd of December?
Yeah, I mean, disabled people very often are at the front of things and are pushing boundaries. You know, we're used to doing it. I often think this, we're used to doing it in all areas of our lives because, you know, you wake up in the morning and then from that point until you go to bed at night, there's things you're pushing against all throughout the day, and you get a resilience from that. If it doesn't grind you down, you get resilience from that, or you can get resilience from that, and you can get a bit of a fight from that. And so you kind of get used to that in your daily life. Everything's a bit of a struggle. You know, I use an electric mobility scooter, and I've got a huge, great big, massive one that I use when I go out in the world. And when I go out in the world, suddenly I find that I'm doing something and I'm going from A to B to meet my friend, and there's a load of steps in the way, so I can't get past it. And so you get used to that sort of fighting and aggro in your life at all the times. And so when you come to our organizations, I think our organizations inherently have that kind of sense of fight within the organizations, because the organizations are fighting even more against sort of social injustice and trying to, you know, level barriers and reduce barriers for everybody, for individuals and for kind of disabled people as a group. And so there's a kind of strength in that, I think, in that sort, in those sort of organizations for that. And so the International Day of Disabled People, you know, I'm a bit, if you Google it, then it comes up with all sorts of different things. And one of the, so you can either get the International Day of Disabled People, you can also get the International Day of People with Disabilities, which gets my hackles up a little bit, because there's that whole social model thing about, you know, moving away from those sort of terminology, because that's a very medicalized understanding where people have the disability. So it's strange that there isn't a universal use of a term anyway across the whole thing.
Although I think that's to do with just like local cultures, and I have softened with my views about sort of how people, you know, terms people to use. Although it can be it can be a sort of like a signifier to how people understand, or what people's values really might be about, you know, definitions of disabled people, or, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, language is a signifier.
Yeah,
it's what it is, isn't it? The language reflects the way that we think. So
I think so. We have to. I mean, I think one of the things, though, it is kind of, and your first point was about people just talking about differently abled and all these new terms, and or kind, not new terms, but kind of things that people are always looking for a different way to describe it. I think sort of some of the it is a challenge for kind of inclusion, like, because if we all free ourselves from labels, then, you know, we see our similarities, and, you know, there are many of them with you know, everyone can relate to one another, I firmly believe, and yet finding ways to describe your own experience and sharing a kind of an identity on the basis of being different from other people is quite important, and particularly important if you need to build community and voice to kind of try and bring about changes in things.
Yeah, creating an in-group and an out-group.
Yes.
That kind of thing. We're all in it together.
Yeah. But then even within, I mean, I think one of the things that is people have kind of people are talking a lot about kind of the intersectionality, and where people experience sort of multiple forms of oppression based on different experiences or aspects of themselves, and I think that's useful in sort of trying to understand, you know, how diversity is and can be celebrated and, you know, appreciated, but also bring people together.
Yeah, I mean, we're quite a difficult group of people to bring together because we're so
Yes.
big.
Yes,
there are so
exactly.
many. A, there's so many of us, and B, we're all so different. So within the category of disability, you've got people like me with acquired impairments, things like MS and whatever it might be, using an electric scooter, people with learning difficulties, people with cerebral palsy. There's a massive list.
Yeah.
And it's quite a difficult thing to unite us all as a whole, as a cohort.
Yeah. And I think that kind of is, so as some of it's got right, then people can kind of just go off and do their own thing, and they don't, that kind of might not, that changes the experience for people. It changes the kind of connections perhaps that people have with a group like disabled people, like is in that term.
And so the International Day of People with Disabilities or Disabled People, has it worked? Has it achieved things? Are there big achievements?
Well, I think there's certainly a value in it, and I think it certainly provides an opportunity for people to have conversations and to put on events and to kind of do stunts that might kind of build community, build awareness. So
without it, I would never have heard about your Elvis impersonator. So
yeah, and he is very good. He is very good.
He is.
Yeah, and yeah, so but it is. But I think also when people hang on to so in York there are. This year has been interesting because you've got some of the there's been more attention by businesses to participate and to kind of think about. So I know that kind of there's a few quite successful. I think one is successful hotel in the city that has actively promoted York Disability Week to its kind of within its venues and within like staff group and stuff like that. And
so who is it doing that? Is it a group of disabled people's organisations that got
so York Disability Week came about after a few years ago, me and some colleagues from York Independent Living Network got some money to organise an event, and we called it York Disability Pride, and it was like a bit of a cabaret. So we had I think we had Lawrence Clark came and performed, and then we had a variety of other people. So the idea, he was like a sort of more had a national profile, and then we had kind of local groups. So there was dancers and musicians and a play, and then some poets, and also Pete Elvis did a slot as well at one of the events as well. And then that then sort of formed into there was a kind of working group for that, and that developed because sort of city to have a week. And so York is full of kind of lots of different weeks here because of its profile. So it has York Design Week, it has the York Walls Festival, and it's just full of it. There's lots and lots. I actually think probably anywhere that there's been a lot more attention around using these events to within kind of community work or whatever to profile stuff. So York has lots of different things that go on, and York calls itself York declared itself a human rights city a few years ago. So
I mean, some of that's all about population density, isn't it? Because you're a city.
Yes, well, but it's not. We're not. Well, we've got a minster or cathedral essentially. Yeah. So York is a city, whereas there's probably more people who live in Tower Hamlets. than live in York. So you know, that is its location. York used to be the capital. It was the capital of the North. So, you know, a long time ago. But so York Disability Week was kind of very much about trying to celebrate International Day and Disability History Month. So it was kind of a way to try and promote that. And then that turned into, oh, let's do a disability week, and that way you could try and engage lots of other organisations to take part in it. So some of the things that are happening here this week are, look, so there's like discos, and then there's like sort of workshops, and some of these are quite practical. So there's driving with a medical condition. Okay. So the William Merritt Centre is a member of Driving Mobility, and they're kind of showing how it works, which is kind of a bit of a useful thing, because I actually know someone just recently who is about to go through a medical driving reassessment type thing. So there's that kind of stuff, and then there's a workshop on making your website digitally accessible, and then poetry. Yeah, poetry for all. And then something that I've been involved with is an exhibition of 20 years of speaking up, self-advocacy and learning difficulties, a history of York People First in photos and easy read. So this is a photo text exhibition that is at the local library on these. There's 40 panels with telling the history of York People First, using a lot of their photographs from their archive. So some of them are of because they came out of like a sort of a day centre. So some of the images are of what used to happen in day centres, and then some of it is about kind of getting more active and people moving into their own homes and stuff like that. So that's interesting. So there's a whole load of things there. So who it's run by now is that, so York is a human rights city, and so York Disability Week then out of a previous event, what happened was that there was a forum, York's Disabled People's Forum was established, and then so they're connected to the Human Rights City, and they run the York Disability Week now. So it comes about from that.
It's quite amazing the amount of stuff that's going on there. I mean, I'd say I'm surprised about it. I wonder whether there's similar amounts of activity going on elsewhere across the country.
I mean, in various places, it depends on like sort of who's around and the kind of the infrastructure of the local community. So I know that actually there's something, I don't know if this is linked to the International Day, but the People's Museum in Manchester have just done an exhibition on history of disability campaigning. So that's just opened, I think, and there's lots of kind of reference to campaigns and various stuff.
Because at the same time, it's of course Disability History Month.
Yes. Which,
interesting, isn't a month like the 1st of November to the 1st of December. It's like something like the 16th of November to the 16th of December or something.
Yeah. I wonder whether, because I think it was a disability in education initially, kind of promoting Disability History Month as a learning resource for schools and education. Yeah. So I think it might be to do with the school year or the term times.
Okay.
As to why it goes like that, I don't know. That is my guess.
Because what's the name of the guy? Because he's like an organisation, doesn't he? I can't remember.
Richard, is it Richard Reiser?
Yeah, that's it. Richard Reiser, who used to be on the international panel at Radar back in the day, the Royal Association for Disability and Rehabilitation. So he was all flitting around the world doing all these meetings. And he was the international committee for them. And he's now, I guess, doing the UK Disability History Month. I think there's a website, and I think he chronicles activities through that, doesn't he, that are taking place across the country.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's another thing, the whole Disability History Month. It's something to celebrate, you know, the history of disabled people across this country and across the world, really. But
yeah,
it's UK Disability History Month.
Yeah, so it's really, I mean, it's an important thing. There's also just thinking that disability has a history is interesting to look at. And I think that, you know, the museums and archives have started just being aware that history, disability does have this kind of incredible history, really, and should be kind of paid attention to. I know that there is a national sort of disability arts archive. I don't know that that's the right name for it, but I'm aware that but kind of, and then increasingly, you know, existing collections have sort of turned their attention to trying to understand what they can see in their collections through a disability lens. Although it, you know, it's an interesting thing to find, because where do you look? Particularly because a couple of 100 years ago, the terms we use today will be very different, and people's sort of focus was completely different. So you might not even know where to look for disability.
Yeah, I've always been very aware that there isn't like a museum specifically devoted to it, because I think you could easily fill a museum full of stuff. Disability history is, like you say, it's changed, and it's not even a case of 100 years. There's terms, you know, that were around 20 or 30 years ago that just don't exist any longer. There's the National Charity Scope, which changed its name in, was it 94 or 95? And until that point, it was called the Spastic Society. And I remember when you worked at the Disability LIB project, I went up and saw the chief executive of the day.
Yeah.
And he had in his office, he had a couple of the plastic figures that they used to have outside their shop of the little girl with the begging thing hanging out, holding out. The new people put money in to collect money for disabled people. And then there was another organisation, the Action for the Crippled Child. Do you remember that? I always remember them. There's a little girl that you put money in the top of her head, I think.
Yes, yeah.
And, you know, these things, we very quickly forget how quickly language changes over time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and those
attitudes and the way that we deal with disability. So we were all in, you know, back in the day, somebody like me with MS on a scooter, I would, you know, before scooters and before wheelchairs, that's like 1950s, even 1940s, I'd have been in bed all day, every day. Yeah. I remember hearing Tanny Gray-Thompson on the radio, and she was talking about if you came back from the Second World War with a spinal injury and, you know, there were no wheelchairs around at that time. So if you came back from the Second World War with a spinal injury, then your life expectancy was 2 years.
Yeah.
But life expectancy now is about the same as everybody else. So things have massively changed even within my parents' lifetime.
Yes, totally. Remarkable how much that, you know, different that, and also kind of with that increased life expectancy, the you know, the numbers of disabled people have grown and grown and grown. So kind of, it might be that there's not one day, maybe if we keep going the rate we're going, may one day not be the minority.
Well, we almost aren't we? I mean, with COVID, you know, COVID was terrible. Like more than 2/3 of people who died from COVID were disabled people.
Yeah.
But then a lot of people who got COVID are now experiencing long COVID.
Yeah.
My mum's next door neighbour in Penzance, she's a nurse, a young nurse in her 40s, and she got COVID, and she got it like 8 months ago, and she hasn't got out of bed ever since. She's just completely laid low by it.
Yeah.
sort of that long COVID thing.
Yeah, yeah, and that, you know, and that's you know, that's not going away, is it?
No. And I mean, watching all the terrible stuff that's going on in Ukraine with the Ukrainian war, and there's a giant machine creating disabled people, isn't it? It's just horrible.
Yeah.
It's what's going on over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the history of disability, it's an ongoing story, basically. It's the idea around how does disability arise and how does it come from, and the changing ways that it happens, and the changing attitudes towards disabled people.
Mm.
Now, I always have it in my mind, I said it to you earlier, I think this is probably one of the best places in the world to live as a disabled person. It very much depends on who you are and where you're from and your background and your impairment and your income. So there's a really awful story on the news last week about a mum who has 2 children, and she called local authorities, called the social services, because her oldest child, who's 10, was acting in ways that she didn't know how to deal with. And she called the local authority just for some help. Hey, look, can you give me some advice? Can you give me some help? What can I do in these situations? Because he's hurting his younger brother and he's exhibiting lots of behaviors that she didn't know how to deal with. And they said, we'll take him away for an assessment. And they took him away for an assessment. And the assessment was more than 100 miles away in a specialist hospital. And she hasn't physically touched him since. He's in like a bed, in a room with nothing in it but a mattress on the floor and a few toys, and that's it. And he's just left in there, locked up all day, every day.
It's not good, is it?
Horrible. And the whole thing about Winterbourne View and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, although this is a country where you can do things like live independently and can get direct payments, there's also a whole section of the community which is completely institutionalized.
Yeah.
So, well, that won't change any day soon. How cheery we are.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's why you need to book Pete, Elvis, our Elvis impersonator from your...
No, but can you hold your book up again? Because I just think that's really worth that guide. I just think that whole notion about disability pride is something that I'm very interested in as an idea, and it's something that we need to start to develop more, I think, the sense of pride in ourselves and who we are and what we do and how we do it.
Yeah.
And how that can be a positive impact on the world.
Yeah, totally. And that is, it is a challenging thing to just to put pride next to disability, because people don't necessarily find that an easy leap to make if you've had a lifetime of being criticised or undervalued or you know, sort of mocked and just left to be on the outside, you know, in very subtle, sometimes very subtle everyday ways that, you know, become, you know, massive points of frustration.
Yeah, starting at a very early age, starting with the education system.
Yeah, but and the pride is not, and so equally pride is just about being okay with it, just as it is, as it stands, without having to be a superhero or to kind of celebrate achievements. It's or not, you know, like to kind of be, oh, you know, despite this, I did this, you know, I climbed a mountain or whatever, you know, like just, you know, just making a cup of tea is a big step, or, you know, those things should be celebrated as well. It's a fine line between getting between sort of saying, look what I can do, but and isn't that wonderful considering my starting point? But you know, like just that I think that kind of there is a tendency for us all to want to see heroes, I think, and that sometimes works against us, because we can't be normal, we can't be regular citizens. Yeah,
that's what's difficult, I think. we should have started this whole conversation, and I didn't, and I apologise, by saying, number one, look at behind me, what a mess. Although what you can see behind me there are my grandson's pictures on the wall.
And a tractor I can see there.
Of course you can see the tractor. What I can see behind you is loads of stuff hanging up and drawings and stuff. What do you do? What do you do with all of that?
So, well, I draw a doodle. I call myself a doodle, and so behind me are various doodles that I'm working on. So I did one recently. Let me show you. Just bear with me 1 second.
Yeah, no, they're fabulous doodles. I saw your doodle that you did for the Alliance for Inclusive Education about the history of disability activism, and I thought that was great.
Oh yeah, there's that one. There is a I can't get it right. Just bear with me.
Yeah, it's not great television.
Great television, isn't it? Anyway, you get the idea. I'll show you around like this stuff.
Oh, brilliant! Look at that.
So there's they're in. So I So yeah, so that is that's there's one on actually strangely. Here's one about direct payments.
Oh, okay.
For a little workshop I'm involved in. This is the talking guide.
Yeah, no, because I saw once I went to a meeting with you and I was sitting next to you and I saw your notebook, and my notebook is just full of scribbles and words, and your notebook looks like that, and it's very, it's great.
Yeah, different
ways of understanding words and different ways of understanding concepts.
Yeah, totally. And actually the piece that I've just done with York People First about their history in an easy read format is trying to tell a story, trying to tell their story, and their achievements and the things that they've made happen in the last 20 years, and I hope that maybe we might be able to put some of their stuff into the local civic archive, because they are an important group, but they're there's some work to be done to look at how archives can be sort of accessible, I think.
Definitely.
Yes. And then I think like the like, and kind of understanding that, in recent times there has been a kind of a more of an activist voice for disability, and that is all about the kind of, that is in part what the International Day of Disabled People is about kind of profiling the human rights of disabled people.
That's really neat, because you've just ended the conversation, I think, in a really rounded way. So we started off talking about that, and we kind of come back to ending up talking about that.
Yeah.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed having a conversation with you.
Yeah, me too.
And I'll press the pause button, and and I'll contact you again maybe at some point in the future, and we'll do it again about something else.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Nice one. Stay warm.
Yes, you too.
And it's going to get really cold because it's about to be winter.
Oh, the real winter tomorrow, isn't it?
It is. Good luck in York in the winter. Nice one. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Right, mate. See you soon.
Hasta la vista.
Bye.
Ciao.